I was sitting at an old drafting table that Ruth had once persuaded me not to throw away. She had said it was a part of me, that without it, I'd be like without hands. She was right. Even 3 years after her death, I still spent evenings at that tabletop, its lines and coffee stains barely visible. The phone rested on the speaker, and from it came the voice of Walter Grimshaw, my former colleague in the design office. Walter was working on the remodeling of an old warehouse in an industrial zone, and something had gone wrong with the support beams. "Barnaby, I just don't get it," he said, and I could hear the fatigue in his voice. "By all calculations, it should hold, but the inspector says the load is not properly distributed." I moved my pencil over a sheet of paper, sketching a rough diagram based on his descriptions. "Did you take into account the weight of the roof structure itself? Not just the snow load, but the metal sheathing itself?" "Shit," Walter exhaled. "That's right. I was using the old data, and it didn't include the new standards." "Recalculate." I put the pencil down and reached for the cold coffee. "And don't forget the wind load. There are strong gusts in your neighborhood in winter." We discussed the details for another 10 minutes, and I felt a familiar satisfaction. My brain still worked, my memory held the numbers and formulas, my hands remembered how to draw. Ken liked to insinuate that I wasn't the same anymore, that I was getting confused about little things, forgetting names. But the engineering calculations never left my mind, and that was more important than any names. "Thanks, Barney." Walter sounded relieved. "You saved me. You always do. Many times." I hung up the phone and looked at my watch. It was almost 9 o'clock at night. Usually at this time, I had already made myself some chamomile tea and was sitting in a chair with a book not fiction, but something about architectural history or memoirs of old engineers. Ruth laughed at this, saying that even in retirement, I couldn't get away from my work. I was just about to put the drawings away when I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. The engine stalled. The doors slammed. Two, so more than one person. I didn't get up, just listened. Footsteps on the gravel, then the porch steps. The doorbell rang a little too briskly for this late. When I opened it, Ken and Dahlia were standing on the doorstep. Their son was holding bags from the supermarket, and Dahlia was holding a bouquet of flowers, which she immediately handed to me with a wide smile. "Barnaby, it's been so long since we've seen each other." I took the flowers, chrysanthemums, yellow and white, not the kind Ruth liked. She preferred simple daisies or roses for that matter. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Ken went through first, nodding at me, but his gaze slid past me without lingering. Dahlia kissed me on the cheek, leaving a sticky trail of lipstick that I wiped away with the back of my hand. "We thought you'd like it if we stopped by," she said as I closed the door. "You know, just for no reason. We bought some groceries. We can grab a bite to eat together." I looked at Ken. He set the bags on the floor in the hallway and unbuttoned his jacket, but didn't take it off. Dahlia stayed in her coat too. They weren't going to linger, but the bags said otherwise. "Come into the kitchen," I said. "I was just finishing up with a project. Are you still working?" Ken followed me down the hall, and I could hear him shifting packages from hand to hand. "I thought you were retired." "I do some counseling." I turned on the kitchen light. Walter needed help with some calculations. "Walter Grimshaw?" "Hoodworm." Dahlia sat down on the edge of the chair, still wearing her coat. "Didn't he retire about 5 years ago?" "He did, but he's back." I put the kettle on the stove. "The trouble with a lot of engineers is, we're not good at sitting idle." Ken put the bags on the table and started pulling out the contents. Milk, bread, some vacuum-packed chicken, vegetables. It all looked too elaborate for a spontaneous visit. "Oh, we thought you might not have fresh food." Dahlia stood up and started looking in my refrigerator without asking permission. "Oh, it's almost empty. Barnaby, are you eating normally?" There was yogurt, cheese, eggs, leftover soup from last night, and a container of salad in the fridge. Enough for one person. "It's fine." I took 3 cups out of the cupboard. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, thank you." Ken sat down across from me and put his hands on the table. His fingers were a little reddish, as if he'd been driving in the cold for a long time. "Dad, we wanted to talk." I nodded, pouring boiling water into the cups. I dipped the tea bags into each one, watching the water darken. "About what?" Ken glanced over to Dahlia. She gave him a barely perceptible nod and he coughed. "Well, Dahlia and I were discussing how you live here, alone. In a house this big. Some. I have plenty of room. I set the cups on the table and sat down. Sure, sure, Dahlia added quickly. But a house needs maintenance, doesn't it? Repairs, cleaning, all that. Isn't it hard for you? I sipped my tea. Too hot, it burned my tongue. I'm getting by. Ken looked at Dahlia again. She smiled at me, but it was the wrong smile. Too wide, too bright. Barnaby, honey, we're just worried about you. She covered my hand with hers. Her palm was warm, fingers with long nails painted bright red. You're important to us. We want you to be comfortable. I didn't move my hand away, just looked at it, then at Ken. I'm fine. You say that. Ken tilted his head to the side, feigning concern. But we can see that. Last time I stopped by, you forgot we'd arranged to meet. I didn't forget. We didn't. He just showed up unannounced and took offense that I was busy. That was 3 months ago, I said, and we didn't have an agreement. See? Ken held up his hands as if I confirmed what he said. You don't even remember. Dahlia stroked my hand and took hers away. Barnaby, we don't want to pressure you. It's just, maybe you need some help. We could come more often, or hire someone to clean, cook. No, I don't need help. I finished my tea and stood up to rinse my cup. Behind me, I could hear them whispering again. The water flowed into the sink, and I watched as it washed away the rest of the tea, swirling in a funnel at the drain. Dad, Ken's voice sounded softer than usual. We could stay the night, help you around the house. What do you say? I turned around. They were both looking at me with an expression of such feigned concern that it almost made me laugh. Ken usually called once a month, unless I called back first. I'd only seen Dahlia 3 times in the last year. Now they were suddenly caring, attentive, willing to stay the night. If you'd like, I said. The guest room is available. Dahlia brightened up. Great, we'll get the stuff from the car. They went out, and I stood at the sink, looking out the window at their car. Ken opened the trunk, pulling out a small gym bag. Dahlia was saying something to him, gesturing, and he was nodding like he was memorizing a lesson. I knew they were up to something. I just didn't realize what it was yet. I woke up to the smell of coffee. It was unusual. Usually in the morning the house smelled only of silence and slightly musty air because the windows were closed for the night. Ruth had always been the first to get up and make coffee. But after she died, I'd switched to instant coffee, which I just poured in boiling water from the kettle. The clock on the nightstand read 8:30. I pulled on a robe, an old one, worn at the elbows but warm, and went out into the hallway. There were voices coming from the kitchen, soft, almost a whisper. I stopped at the door without going in. Just do it quickly, Dahlia was saying. The faster the better. I know, Ken replied, but we have to wait for the right moment. What moment? He's alone. It's just the 2 of us. She stopped talking when she heard the floorboards creak under my foot. I walked into the kitchen, pretending I hadn't heard. Good morning, I said. Dahlia turned around from the stove where something was frying in a pan. Her face was pink from the steam, her smile strained. Barnaby. Good morning. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs and bacon, toast. Sit down, please. Ken was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, looking out the window. When I came in, he turned and nodded at me, but his gaze was absent, like he was thinking about something else. I sat down across from him. Dahlia set a plate in front of me with scrambled eggs, bacon, and 2 pieces of buttered toast. It looked appetizing and smelled good, but I didn't feel like eating. Thank you, I said, taking my fork. We ate in silence. Ken was fiddling with his scrambled eggs, Dahlia was munching on her toast, and every now and then she gave him a quick glance. I cut off a piece of bacon, chewed. It was a little too salty, but it was okay. Dad, Ken put down his fork and coughed. I noticed last night that the faucet in your bathroom was leaking. Maybe I should take a look. I looked up. The faucet in the bathroom wasn't leaking. I would have noticed. What faucet? Well, the one over the sink. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. I could hear it dripping. Maybe the gasket needs changing. I didn't hear anything, I said. You were asleep, Dahlia added quickly. Ken was up during the night, so he heard it. Didn't you, honey? Ken nodded. Yeah, I thought there was something wrong. Let me take a look, huh? I've got my tools in the car. I finished my coffee and stood up. All right, Let's take a look. The three of us went into the bathroom. I turned on the light, and the room was filled with a bright white glow from the lamp above the mirror. Everything was in its place. The towels on the rack, the soap dish by the sink, the old rug that Ruth had bought 10 years ago that I'd never thrown out, even though it was worn. Ken went to the sink and opened the faucet. The water flowed smoothly without any drips. He closed it, waited. Nothing dripped. Strange, he muttered. It had dripped during the night. He bent over, looked under the sink, opened the cabinet door. There were cleaning supplies, spare rolls of toilet paper, an old sponge. Maybe it's a pipe, he straightened up. We'll have to look at it from the other side. Dad, would you come in here for a second? Show me where your water shutoff is. I went into the bathroom. Ken was at the sink. Dahlia was in the doorway. I pointed to the cabinet. The valve's over there on the left. Uh-huh, right. He squatted down and reached his hand into the cabinet, pretending to feel the pipes. I stood next to him, arms crossed over my chest. Nothing was leaking. That much was obvious. Ken was just stalling. Dad, can you shine the light with your phone? It's a little dark in here. I pulled my phone out of my robe pocket, not a smartphone, but an old push-button model that I kept charged in case the main one died or the power went out. I turned on the flashlight, pointed it at the locker. Here, look. Ken pointed to some kind of pipe. It's kind of humid in here. I leaned down to see. At that moment, Ken straightened up sharply, shoved me with his shoulder, not hard, but enough to make me retreat into the bathroom and sprinted out the door. The door slammed shut with a loud pop. The latch clicked. I straightened up, looked at the closed door, pulled the handle. It was locked. Ken, I said softly. Open it. There was no answer. There were hurried footsteps outside the door, Dahlia's voice almost a whisper. Did you lock it? Yes. Ken's voice sounded tense. Come on, hurry up. The footsteps moved down the hallway. I heard them go down the stairs, then the door to the office, the computer where I sometimes checked my email and worked with electronic drawings. I pulled the knob again. The door wouldn't budge. The latch had been installed a month ago. Ken had brought it in, saying it was for security, so that if someone broke in, I could lock myself in the bathroom from the inside. I didn't understand the logic. Why lock myself in the bathroom when I could just call the police? But I didn't argue. Now I understood why he wanted to do it. I sat down on the edge of the tub, putting my phone on my lap. My heart was beating steady, my breathing calm. There was no panic, just the cold realization of what had happened. Footsteps were heard outside the door again. Quick, nervous. Dahlia was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. Then her voice grew louder, almost hysterical. Are you sure this is going to work? Shut up, Ken cut her off. Just do what I said. More footsteps. The front door slammed. The car started, the engine coughed, then ran smoothly. I got up, went to the little window over the bathroom. It was high, glazed with frosted glass, through which I could see nothing but blurred silhouettes. The car was in the driveway, engine running. Then it stopped. The door slammed again, footsteps on the gravel. Dahlia went back into the house. I sat down on the edge of the tub again and looked at the phone in my hand. It was small, push button, with scratches on the case. I'd bought it about 7 years ago, when everyone around me had already switched to smartphones. But I liked its simplicity: call, text, nothing else. It would hold a charge for weeks. Downstairs, the voices came again. Ken spoke quickly, curtly. Dahlia answered, her voice trembling. Then silence. Footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the floorboards outside the bedroom. I sat and listened as they walked through my house, opening closets, searching for something. Listened to Dahlia laugh nervously, a short, sharp sound, like a sob. Then footsteps on the stairs again, faster this time. The office door slammed. Ken's voice muffled by the wall. Yes, I'm here. No, it's okay. Is the code the same? Pause. Okay. Wait. I looked at the bathroom door. It's solid wood with a bolt on the outside. I couldn't kick it down, and there was no point. The window's too small to fit through. I picked up my phone, unlocked the screen. The battery showed 82%. The signal was weak, but it was good enough. Footsteps again, now at the bathroom door. Ken stopped on the other side. I could hear his breathing, frequent, ragged. Dad, he said softly. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. I just sat there, staring at the door. The footsteps were gone. I continued to sit on the edge of the tub, phone in hand, listening. Another door slammed downstairs. The front door, I think. The car engine started again, this time without stalling. I looked at the phone. The screen glowed dimly. I didn't panic, just listened to whatever they were up to unfold outside the door. The silence in the house felt wrong. Not the kind of silence you get in the morning when you wake up and lie there, listening to the sun slowly flood the room with light. This silence was tense, like the house was holding its breath and waiting for something. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the crack in the tile near the floor. It stretched from the corner to the middle of the wall, jagged like a zipper. It had appeared about 5 years ago, when I dropped a heavy wrench here to fix a faucet, and the tool had slipped out of my hand and hit the tile with a clang. Ruth stood in the doorway, with her arms crossed over her chest, and shook her head. "We have to change the tiles," she said. "One crack isn't critical," I replied. Ruth sighed but didn't argue. She rarely argued with me about such trivial matters. She said that engineers were stubborn people, and retired engineers were doubly so. Now I looked at that crack and thought it had outlived Ruth. Probably outlived me, too. Footsteps were heard downstairs again. Ken was coming up the stairs slowly, pausing at each step, as if he were carrying something heavy, or maybe he was just thinking. The footsteps stopped somewhere in the hallway, by the bedroom door, by the sound of it. Then farther on, toward the study. The door opened with a creak. The hinges needed oiling, and I kept meaning to, but I couldn't get around to it. The door closed. I got up from the edge of the tub, walked to the door, and put my ear to the wood. Ken's voice was muffled, but the words came out clearly enough. He was on the phone, apparently on speakerphone, because I could hear a woman's voice on the other end. "Are you sure?" It was Dahlia, her voice sounding tense. "Yes." Ken was breathing heavily, as if he'd just climbed a ladder with a load. "I'm logged in. The code hasn't changed. It's the same as it was a year ago when I set it up." "How long is it?" Pause. I pressed my ear tighter against the door, trying not to breathe too loudly. 170,000 in the main account. Ken's voice shook with excitement. "Plus the pension, but I'm not getting into that yet. It's too complicated, and there are withdrawal limits." 170,000, Dahlia repeated, as if tasting the words. "Oh my God, Ken. I know. Are you sure he won't get out?" "From where?" "The door's bolted, the window's small. He's old, he won't kick out. We'll be long gone by the time anyone catches us." Dahlia said something, but it was quieter, I couldn't hear. Ken answered her, then fell silent. I could hear the tapping of keys. He was probably working on his computer, transferring money. I stepped away from the door, walked back to the tub, and sat down. $170,000. It was all my savings. The years I'd worked as a project engineer, the pension contributions, the interest from conservative investments I'd made on the advice of a financial advisor. Money I was saving for my old age, for unexpected medical expenses, to leave something for my granddaughter Iris when she graduated from university. Ken knew about this money. A year ago, he had come specifically to help me set up online banking. At the time, I thought it was a rare gesture of caring for him. Now I realized he was just memorizing passwords. I pulled my cell phone out of my robe pocket. It was small, a push button, with scratches on the case and worn buttons. Ruth had always made fun of it, said it was time to switch to a smartphone like all normal people. But I loved its simplicity. Call, text, flashlight. You don't need anything else. And it held a charge for weeks, unlike these modern gizmos that you have to plug in every night. I unlocked the screen. The battery showed 82%. The signal was weak, but there was a signal 2 sticks out of 5. There were voices downstairs again. Ken spoke louder, almost shouting, "I've got the money, pack your bags, we're leaving." His voice sounded excited, almost hysterical, as if he couldn't believe his own luck. Dahlia laughed nervously, high-pitched, a laugh that echoed off the walls of the house and reached me even through the closed door. I dialed 911 on the phone. I looked at the numbers on the screen, then pressed the green call button. A beep, second, third, 4. "Emergency services, I'm listening to you," said a woman's voice, calm, professional, uncluttered. My name is Barnaby Croft, I said softly, but pronouncing each word clearly. I am located at 342 Riverview Drive, Green Bay, Wisconsin. I have been forcibly locked in a bathroom. My son and his wife are currently withdrawing money from my bank account without my permission. Short pause. I could hear the dispatcher typing on the keyboard. Fast, confident. Sir, you said you were locked indoors? Her voice remained steady, but I picked up a note of attention. Yes, in the bathroom on the second floor of my house. The door is locked from the outside with a bolt my son installed a month ago. I can't get out on my own. I see. Are you safe now? Do you require medical attention? No. I'm not hurt or sick, just locked up. Okay, sir. You mentioned someone taking money out of your account. Can you explain that? My son, Ken Croft. He's 42 years old. He's in his office on the first floor of this house right now, transferring money from my bank account to his card through online banking. The amount is $170,000. I didn't authorize that. The keyboard banged again. The dispatcher was talking to someone nearby. I could hear muffled voices in the background, the crackle of a walkie-talkie. Sir, I'm dispatching a patrol car to you right now. Stay on the line, please. How many people are in the house besides you? 2. Ken Croft, my son, and Dahlia Croft, his wife. She's 38 years old. They're unarmed as far as I know. They just locked me up and are trying to steal money from my account. I see. Sir, do you have access to water and fresh air in the room you're in? Yes, it's a bathroom, there's ventilation and water. Good. Cell phone rings. Patrol car's on its way. ETA is about 10 minutes. Can you stay safe until they arrive? Yes, I can. Cell phone ringing. Good, don't hang up, please. I'll stay in touch with you until the officers arrive. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Good. Footsteps were heard downstairs again. Ken was coming down the stairs, quickly jumping over the steps. Then the sound of his footsteps traveled to the front door. It opened, and a rush of cold air blew into the house. I could feel it even up here, through the crack under the bathroom door. The door slammed shut. I got up, walked to the window above the bathroom. I stood on its edge, holding my hand on the wall so I wouldn't lose my balance. The window was high up, frosted glass that made it hard to see through. Only blurred silhouettes and specks of light. But in the gap between the frame and the glass, where the putty had long since crumbled, I could see a piece of the yard. Ken's car was in the driveway, a dark blue sedan he'd bought last year, bragging about the low-interest loan he'd gotten. Ken walked toward her at a brisk pace, holding a folder in his hand, apparently with paperwork. He got behind the wheel but left the door open. He looked for something in the glove compartment, then pulled out his cell phone, looked at the screen. Sir? The dispatcher's voice brought me back to reality. I'm here, I answered, climbing off the edge of the tub and back onto the floor. Is your son still in the house? No. He went out to the car in the yard. He's sitting behind the wheel, but he hasn't started the car. His wife seems to be inside the house. I see. Officers will be here in 7 or 8 minutes. I sat back down on the edge of the tub, holding the phone to my ear. The screen glowed pale in the semi-darkness of the bathroom. The battery was now showing 79%. There would be enough charge for a long time. Downstairs, the front door slammed again. Footsteps on the floor. Quick, light heels. It was Dahlia. She ran up the stairs, almost jogging, past the bathroom door without even slowing down. The bedroom door swung open. There was the sound of dresser drawers being pulled out, the rustle of fabric. A thud, something fell to the floor. Shit, Dahlia muttered. Then footsteps again, down the stairs faster than she'd been going up. The front door slammed a third time. I stood on the edge of the tub again, peered through the slit of the window. The car was still standing there, the motor not running. Dahlia was saying something to Ken, waving her arms. He nodded, then started the engine. The engine started, smoothly with a slight rumble. The car turned around in the driveway but didn't leave. It stopped right in front of the house, engine still running. Sir, what's going on right now? Dispatch asked. They started the car, but they're not leaving. They're standing in front of the house with the engine running. Got it. Patrol will be here in 5 minutes. Front door opened again. Quick steps. Heels on the wooden floor of the hallway. then up the stairs. Dahlia went back into the house. She went upstairs, walked to the bedroom. Something fell again. She swore half-heartedly, the words unintelligible, but the intonation clear. "Dahlia!" Ken shouted from downstairs, voice irritated. "Hurry the hell up! I'm coming, I'm coming!" She ran out of the bedroom, nearly tripping at the top of the stairs. I could hear her grabbing the banister, regaining her balance. Then footsteps clattered downstairs. I continued to stand at the window, peering through the narrow slit. Dahlia came out of the house carrying a large bag, apparently the same one she'd come back for. She got into the car. The door slammed shut. The car jerked out of the driveway, rolled toward the exit. But it didn't leave. It stopped at the edge in front of the gate. The engine was running, the exhaust fumes billowing white vapor in the cold air. Then the car started back towards the house. "Sir?" The dispatcher waited. They tried to drive away, but came back. "The car is back in front of the house. Officers are on your street. They'll be here in 2 minutes." The car door opened. Dahlia jumped out, ran back to the house. "I forgot my bag!" she shouted, her voice hysterical. I climbed off the edge of the tub, sat back down, closed my eyes. They were nervous, fidgeting, making stupid mistakes. Good. I sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the tiles. It was white with a faint cream tint, cracked in places from time not badly, just the little spider webs of cracks that appeared when the material aged. We laid it with Ruth 20 years ago. Or rather, I laid it, and she stood beside me, giving advice and handing me tools when I asked. I wasn't retired yet, working full-time on the projects, but I tried to spend my weekends at home. Ruth wanted blue tile, nautical tile, saying it would remind me of the vacations we'd spent on the coast of Maine. We'd rented a little cottage by the ocean then, and every morning I'd wake up to the sound of the waves. Ruth would come out on the veranda with her coffee and stand there looking out at the water, and I would look at her from the side and think how lucky I was. But blue tiles cost more, so I insisted on white. More practical, I said at the time. Easier to accessorize, a universal color. Ruth didn't argue, just sighed and nodded. She seldom argued with me about such things, though I often found myself thinking I'd been wrong not to listen to her. Blue tiles would probably have been better. Maybe then I'd remember that vacation more often, that morning on the veranda, that coffee in her hands. I ran my finger along the seam between the tiles. The grout was darkening in places, crumbling in some places. I should have renewed it, but I kept putting it off. First I didn't have time, then Ruth got sick. First just fatigue, which we wrote off as age, then the diagnosis, then hospitals, doctors, treatment. Then she died, and I just forgot about the tiles. Forgot about a lot of things, to be honest. The house needed attention. The roof leaked in places. The gutters were clogged with leaves. The floorboards creaked. I only gave it the bare minimum, fixed what broke critically, and waited for the rest. Sometimes I thought the house was aging with me, and we were both just living out our lives, not trying hard enough to look better than we were. In my robe pocket, the phone was still on with the dispatcher. I could hear her talking to someone in the background, voices muffled, words unintelligible, but intonations businesslike. The crackle of a walkie-talkie occasionally broke through the background. Then she came back to me, her voice closer. "Sir, the officers are on your street now. Just another minute, maybe a minute and a half." "Okay," I replied, looking at my hands. Old hands, thin skin, veins protruding. The fingers were a little crooked, an arthritis that had started about 10 years ago and had only gotten worse since then. Ruth massaged my hands in the evenings, rubbed some kind of menthol-scented ointment on them. Said it helped. Maybe it did, or maybe it just felt good that she was doing it. There was the sound of sirens outside, distant at first, barely audible, then closer, louder. A high, shrill howl that cut through the silence of the morning and made my heart beat a little faster. I stood up from the edge of the tub. My knees crunched as I straightened up and walked to the window. I climbed up to the edge of the tub, holding onto the wall with my hand. My balance wasn't what it used to be, and I tried not to make any sudden movements. Through the gap between the frame and the glass, I could see the flashing lights. Blue and red, they flooded the yard with pulsing light, turning the familiar outline of trees and car into some surreal landscape. The light reflected off the windows of the house across the street, off the metal of the fence, off the wet gravel of the driveway. The sirens stopped abruptly. The sound of their echoes hung in the air for a second, as if it didn't want to go away. Then it too dissolved. The silence after the sirens seemed even more dense. Then car doors slammed. Several, one after another, a metallic sound I could hear even through the closed window and thick bathroom wall. "Police!" A voice from outside, loud, commanding, without a shadow of doubt or softness. "Hands on the hood of the car, now!" I climbed off the edge of the tub, carefully placing my feet on the cold tile. Pressed the phone to my ear. "They're here," I said to the dispatcher. "Yes, sir." "Stay indoors and don't open the door until the officers give the command. They're about to enter the house." "Got it!" Outside, Dahlia screamed, high, hysterical. Her voice trailed off into a shriek that pierced the morning silence and reverberated off the walls of the house. The words were unintelligible, but the intonation expressed pure panic. That panic when one realizes that everything has gone wrong, that the plan has collapsed, that the end is near. Then Ken's voice, also loud but not as hysterical. He tried to explain something to justify himself. The words came out quickly, confused. "Officer, it's a misunderstanding. We were just helping my father," he asked. "Hands on the hood. Now!" Another voice, also male but harsher. I went back to the bathroom door, put my ear to the wood. Inside the house was still quiet, but outside there were still voices, footsteps on the gravel, the sound of the radio. Then the front door downstairs swung open. I heard it hit the hallway wall with a thud. Someone came into the house, heavy footsteps on the wooden floor, the creak of the living room floorboards. "Police! Anybody in the house?" A man's voice, loud, confident, filling the space of the house with his presence. I took a step away from the door, drew air into my chest, felt my lungs expand under my ribs. "I'm here!" I shouted as loudly as I could, straining my vocal cords. "On the second floor, in the bathroom, locked outside." My voice sounded hoarse. I hadn't shouted that loud in a long time, my throat unused to the strain. But I was heard. The footsteps downstairs stopped for a second, then came again, faster, more confident, more purposeful. Someone was climbing the stairs and the steps creaked under their weight. Apparently the officer was a large man, his steps heavy, measured. The steps reached the top landing, turned into the hallway. I heard the creak of the bedroom floorboards, the one I'd been meaning to fix. Then the footsteps stopped just outside the bathroom door. "Mr. Croft?" A voice now very close by, behind the thin wooden partition. "Are you in there?" "Yes," I answered, and my voice sounded calmer than I'd expected. "The door is bolted from the outside." I could hear the officer fiddling with the bolt. The metal creaked. The latch was old. I hadn't oiled it since Ken had installed it. Then a click, and the door slowly opened inward. A policeman stood on the threshold. Tall, broad-shouldered, uniform impeccably pressed, radio on his belt, handcuffs, holstered pistol. His face was serious but not rigid, more like professionally focused. His eyes are attentive, dark brown, and they quickly glance around the bathroom, first at me, then at the space around me, assessing the situation. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice steady, calm. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine." The officer stepped aside, allowing me into the hallway. I stepped out of the bathroom, and the light seemed too bright after an hour and a half indoors. The window at the end of the hallway let in the morning light, which fell obliquely to the floor and highlighted the dust in the air. I squinted, blinking a few times, adjusting to the brightness. "Mr. Croft, can you come downstairs?" The officer stood beside me, not touching me but ready to help if needed. "Yes," I answered and headed for the stairs. My legs were stiff from sitting on the edge of the tub for so long, and the first steps were difficult. My knees crunched as I started down, holding on to the railing. The wood beneath my palm was smooth, polished by years of touch. My touch, Ruth's, Ken's, when he'd been little and run up these stairs holding onto the banister with both hands. Down in the hallway was another officer, a woman, short, with her blonde hair in a tight bun. She was saying something into her walkie-talkie, holding it to her ear, but stopped talking when she saw me. "Mr. Croft?" she asked. "Yes, Officer Tremaine." "I'm glad you're okay," I nodded. The officer behind me followed down, stopping on the bottom step. "Come into the living room, please," Officer Tremaine said, pointing to the door on the right with her hand. I walked through the hallway. The front door was open wide, and the cold November air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and fallen leaves. A third officer stood on the threshold, looking out into the courtyard where the lights of police cars were flashing. The living room greeted me with the familiar mess I hadn't cleaned up since the evening before. On the coffee table lay the blueprints I'd reviewed before Ken and Dahlia arrived, an empty coffee cup standing next to it. Ken was sitting on the couch, an old one upholstered in a faded fabric with a pattern that Ruth had once thought beautiful. His hands were behind his back, his handcuffs gleaming in the light from the window. His face was pale, his lips compressed. He stared at the floor without raising his eyes. Next to him was Dahlia, also handcuffed, her face red and wet. Her eyes raced around the room, from the officer at the window, to the door, to me, then back to the officer. She licked her lips nervously, her breathing frequent, intermittent. I stopped in the doorway of the living room. Officer Tremaine walked past me, stood by the fireplace, which Ruth and I hadn't stoked in 5 years. The male officer who had led me out of the bathroom stopped beside me. Ken looked up, saw me. His face twitched like he wanted to smile or cry, but didn't know which was right. Then he opened his mouth. "Daddy," his voice was hoarse, broken. "Daddy, it's a misunderstanding. I just wanted to—" I looked at him, just looked at him, without looking away, without blinking. Didn't say a word. Ken stopped talking, closed his mouth, lowered his gaze to the floor again. Dahlia sobbed loudly, harshly, then again and again. She began to cry, not quietly but tearfully, with wails that burst out of her as if she couldn't contain them. "Barnaby, please." Her voice trembled, her words jumbled. "It's a mistake. We didn't mean you any harm, really. It's just circumstances, you understand, don't you? We owed debts, you know? Debts that we just didn't know how to—" The officer at the window turned to her. "Mrs. Croft, please remain silent." But Dahlia wasn't listening. She kept talking, sobbing between words. "We'll get it back. I swear we'll get it all back. Just give us time. We'll find a way. Barnaby, please tell them it's a misunderstanding. Tell them you don't want to press charges." You shifted my gaze from Ken to her. Dahlia was looking at me with a pleading look in her eyes, makeup smeared across her cheeks, lips quivering. I didn't say anything, just stared. Officer Tremaine pulled a notebook from the breast pocket of her uniform, opened it. "Mr. Croft, can you tell me what happened this morning?" Her voice was businesslike, but not harsh. I took my eyes off Dahlia, looked at the officer. "They arrived last night," I began, trying to state the facts clearly, without emotion. "They said they wanted to check up on me. They stayed the night. This morning my son Ken said the faucet in the bathroom was leaking. Asked me to go in there and show him where the water shutoff was. When I went in, he locked the door from the outside with the latch." Officer Tremaine took notes without taking her eyes off her notebook. "What happened next?" I heard them talking. Ken told Dahlia on the phone that he had the money and that they were leaving. Then they went around the house, packing. Ken was in the study working on the computer, withdrawing money from my bank account. $170,000. Did you hear that with your own ears? Yeah. I was locked in the bathroom, but I could hear them talking through the door. Ken was telling Dahlia that he logged on to online banking and was transferring money. "I see. What did you do after that?" "Called 911. Explained the situation to the dispatcher, gave the address, stayed on the line until the police arrived." Officer Tremaine nodded as she continued taking notes, then looked up. "Do you have proof that money was withdrawn without your authorization?" "I can show you the account's transaction history," I said. "The computer's in the office. If Ken hasn't logged out in time, you'll see everything." "We'll check." Officer Tremaine looked at her colleague at the window. "Dunlap, go to the office and check out the computer." Officer Dunlap nodded and walked out of the living room. I heard his footsteps down the hall, then the creak of the office door. Dahlia sobbed again. "It's not true. Barnaby himself told us we could have the money. He said he wanted to help us, didn't he, Ken? Tell them." Ken was silent, staring at the floor, jaw clenched. "Ken!" Dahlia's voice became hysterical. "Say something." Ken slowly raised his head. looked at me, eyes red, moist. His lips were trembling. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly. "I didn't know how else to. The debts are such that I thought you'd still leave it to us when, well, later. I just took it in advance." I didn't say anything back, just stared at him. Officer Denlap came back into the living room, holding a printout in his hand. "System open, session active. Transaction history shows 3 transfers made this morning between 8:05 and 8:32. The total amount is $170,000, transferred to an account registered to Ken Croft." Officer Tremaine took the printout, reviewed it. "Mr. Croft, were these transfers made with your permission?" "No," I said. "I see." She put the printout away in a folder she had pulled out from somewhere. Then she looked at Ken and Dahlia. "Ken Croft, Dahlia Croft, you are being held on suspicion of unlawful imprisonment and theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be provided for you by the state. Do you understand those rights?" Ken nodded without raising his eyes. Dahlia sobbed. Yes," she whispered. Officer Denlap went out into the courtyard and returned a minute later, a large gym bag in his hand. He set it on the coffee table, unzipped it. Inside were wads of cash, bills of 150 rubber bands. "Found in the trunk of the car," he said. "Preliminary count is about $30,000 in cash." Officer Tremaine looked at me. "Did you know they had cashed in some of the funds?" "No," I answered. "But I heard Ken say he was transferring the money in installments to cash out later." Officer Tremaine nodded, taking notes, then closed the notebook. "Mr. Croft, we're going to need to take a formal statement from you at the station. Are you willing to come with us now, or would you prefer later?" I looked at the bag of money, then at Ken and Dahlia. Ken sat with his head down, shoulders slumped. Dahlia was still sobbing, but quieter, more hopeless. "I'll be right there," I said. "I'll just get changed." The station was in a 2-story brick building on Main Street, next to the post office. I'd been here before about 15 years ago, when our bicycle had been stolen from the garage and I'd come to file a report. The building had seemed imposing, serious to me then, but now it was just old. The brick had darkened with age. The visor over the entrance was bent on one side. The paint on the door was peeling. Officer Tremaine took me inside. I had time to change at home. I wore my usual pants, shirt, sweater. The robe was left hanging on a hook in the bathroom, and I thought it was unlikely I'd ever be able to wear it again without remembering that morning. Inside the station smelled like coffee and something clerical, paper, printer toner. Behind the counter sat the desk clerk, a young guy in a uniform who nodded to Officer Tremaine and pointed down the hallway to the left. "Detective Blaine is in office number 3, he said. We walked down the hallway. The linoleum underfoot was worn, shiny from frequent washing. On the walls were informational posters about traffic safety, about domestic violence, about emergency numbers. I read them absent-mindedly as we walked, not memorizing a word. Office number 3 was at the end of the hallway. Officer Tremaine knocked on the door, waited, then opened it. "Detective, this is Mr. Croft." "Thank you, Tremaine." "Show him in, please." I went inside. The office was small, a desk, 2 chairs on either side, a metal cabinet against the wall, a window with blinds that let in daylight. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s, wearing a dark blue jacket, her hair short, gray, slicked back. Her face was tired but attentive. She stood up as I entered, held out her hand. "Rowena Blaine, detective," she said. "Have a seat, Mr. Croft." I shook her hand, a firm handshake, no pressure, and sat down in the chair opposite. The chair creaked under my weight, the metal legs shifting slightly on the linoleum. Detective Blaine sat back down, opened the folder on the desk in front of her, pulled a pen from the breast pocket of her jacket. "Mr. Croft, I know it's been a difficult morning," she began, looking at me calmly, not overly sympathetic, but not coldly either. "I need to take a formal statement from you about what happened. Are you ready to answer questions?" "Yes," I said. "Good. For the record, your full name and address." "Barnaby Edward Croft, 342 Riverview Drive, Green Bay, Wisconsin." She wrote down without taking her eyes off the paper. Date of birth? March 23rd, 1953. Thank you. Can you please tell us how the situation that led to this morning's incident began? When did your son and his wife arrive at your house? I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap. Last night, around 9 o'clock. They usually call once a month, maybe once every 2 months, but they rarely come. The last time they were at my place was Thanksgiving last year. Did they give you any notice? No. They just showed up on the doorstep, said they wanted to check on me. They brought groceries. Did that strike you as odd? I wondered. Did you? Yes, of course it did. But I didn't voice my suspicions then. I didn't want to sound paranoid. Yes, I answered simply. They don't usually care about that sort of thing. Detective Blaine nodded, continuing to write. What happened next? They stayed the night, said they wanted to help me around the house. In the morning, Ken said there was a leaky faucet in the bathroom, asked me to show him where the water shutoff was. When I went into the bathroom, he locked me outside. What kind of lock? The deadbolt. He installed it a month ago, said it was for security so if someone broke in, I could lock myself in the bathroom from the inside. Detective Blaine looked up from her paper, looked at me. And you didn't find that odd then? I did, I admitted. But I didn't argue. I thought maybe he was really concerned for my safety. I see. After he locked you in, what did you hear? I told her about the conversations I heard through the door, about Ken telling Dahlia he had the money, that it was leaving, how I'd called the police, how I'd waited. Detective Blaine wrote everything down, sometimes asking clarifying questions, the exact time, the exact words I heard. When I finished, she put her pen away, leaned back in her chair. Mr. Croft, do you have reason to believe that your son and his wife planned this in advance? Yes, I answered without hesitation. They had come with their belongings, their bags. Ken had installed a deadbolt on the door beforehand. He knew the passwords to my bank account. This was all planned. How did he get access to your bank information? A year ago, I thought back to the day Ken arrived with a laptop and offered to help. I'd been excited at the time, thinking my son was finally caring. Ken helped me set up online banking. He said it would make it easier for me to manage my accounts without having to go to the bank every time. I agreed. He sat at the computer, entering data, setting up the system. That's probably when he memorized the passwords. Detective Blaine shook her head, but not judgmentally, more with an understanding of a situation she'd probably seen more than once. Unfortunately, it's a common pattern, she said. Relatives gain access under false pretenses and then use it to their advantage. I nodded. I had nothing to add. Mr. Croft, have you and your son had any conflicts lately? Disputes about money? About inheritance? I thought. There were no conflicts, more like a constant underlying tension that I preferred to ignore. Ken had been asking for money regularly for the past few years. I began slowly, remembering the conversations that had been repeated with enviable regularity. Small amounts at first, for car repairs, for bills. I gave it without question. Then the sums got bigger. He talked about investments, about opportunities that should not be missed. I'd say no, and then Dahlia would step in. What did Dahlia do? Hinting, I grinned without joy, always talking about family support, about how parents should help their kids, about how Ken worked hard, but he was down on his luck, and if he had some startup capital, things would change. She never asked directly, but the message was clear. And you said no? I did. After my wife died 3 years ago, I was more careful with my money. I realized that Ken saw me more as a resource than a father. It was painful to realize, but I preferred to know the truth. Detective Blaine wrote it down, then looked at me again. You mentioned that after your wife died. How long ago was that? 3 years. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Ruth died of lung cancer. She'd been sick for 6 months. Ken came to the funeral, and then he visited me a couple times, and then he stopped. The only phone calls I got were the occasional one. Oh, I see, I'm sorry. I nodded, accepting the condolence but not needing it. The pain of losing Ruth had long since dulled, become a constant backdrop I'd learned to live with. Detective Blaine turned a page in the folder, glanced through the records. Do you have any other children besides Ken? No, just him. Grandchildren? Iris. I remembered her smile. Last seen on the video call screen about 3 months ago. Ken's daughter. She's 21 years old. Goes to university out of state. We don't talk much, but she's a good girl. Not like her parents. Does she know what happened? I don't think so. I don't think Ken told her. Do you want us to contact her? I've been thinking. Iris couldn't have heard about this from the police. It's my responsibility. No, I said. I'll contact her myself later. Detective Blaine nodded, respecting my decision. Good. Mr. Croft, do you have any questions for me? I shook my head. No. Then I need you to read and sign your statement. After that, you can go home. She handed me some sheets, a printout of my words that she had written down. I read carefully, checking every phrase. Everything was spelled out accurately without distortion. I took the pen she held out and signed at the bottom of each page. His hand didn't shake. His handwriting was smooth. Detective Blaine took the sheets, put them in a folder. Thank you, Mr. Croft. We'll be in touch if we need any further statements. I got up to leave. Detective Blaine got up as well. On you want. Mr. Croft, she said as I turned toward the door. You did the right thing in calling the police. I looked at her. She was standing with her hand on the edge of the table, her face serious but not without sympathy. I know, I replied. The cab stopped in front of the house around noon. The meter read $18.40, and I took a 20 and a 5 out of my pocket, handed it to the driver, and told him to keep the change. He thanked me, and I walked out into the driveway and stood looking at the house. There were no more police cars. The flashing lights were gone, the sirens silent, and there was just my house, a 2-story house, familiar down to the last crack in the stucco. The gravel in the driveway was tire spread, a few pebbles lying on the grass. I thought I'd sweep it up, but later, not today. My car was taken as evidence. It had been parked in the yard all morning as the events unfolded and had nothing to do with the theft. But Detective Blaine had explained to me that it was standard procedure. They checked everything at the crime scene. I didn't disagree, just nodded. I hadn't needed the car much in the last few years. I rarely drove it once a week to get groceries at the supermarket in the suburbs, and sometimes to the doctor's office for routine checkups. I walked up the porch steps, and the third one from the bottom creaked under my foot. The same one I'd been meaning to fix for the last 5 years, but hadn't gotten around to it. I took the keys out of my pants pocket and unlocked the door. The lock clicked familiarly. The door opened with a slight creak of hinges, and I stepped inside. Silence greeted me in the hallway. Not the tense silence of the morning, when I'd sat locked in the bathroom, listening to every sound outside the door, trying to figure out what was going on. Just the usual emptiness of a house with no one in it. The house was empty, but it didn't seem alien. The walls remembered me. The floor creaked under my footsteps the same way it had for 30 years straight. I hung my jacket on the coat rack, the old wooden one we'd bought at a yard sale when we first moved in, and walked into the kitchen. The kettle was on the stove where Dahlia had left it that morning. I filled it with tap water, put it on the burner, and turned on the gas. The blue flame flared up with a quiet pop, licking the bottom of the kettle. While the water was heating up, I took a jar of instant coffee out of the cupboard. Cheap, no frills, the kind I'd been drinking for the last few years. I poured 2 spoonfuls into a cup and waited for the kettle to whistle. The whistle cut through the silence of the kitchen sharply, shrilly. I turned off the gas, poured boiling water into the cup, stirred it with a spoon. Steam rose, warm and moist, smelling bitter. I took the cup in my hands, feeling the warmth through the porcelain, and walked into the living room. Everything was the same here as it had been the morning before the arrest. The couch where Ken and Dahlia sat handcuffed. The coffee table with my blueprints, which were still unfolded. The warehouse project for Walter. The calculations for the support beams. The pencil notes in the margins. The chair by the window was my favorite, an old one, with a worn seat and worn armrests, the upholstery worn to holes in places. I sat down in that chair, put my cup on the armrest, and looked out the window. The yard looked the same as usual. The lawn, which I mowed every 2 weeks in the summer, though I mowed it less often this year because my back hurt. The maple tree that Ruth and I had planted when the tree was a thin twig and Ken was about 12 years old. Now the trunk was as thick as my thigh, the crowns spread over half the yard, and in the fall the leaves would fall for weeks, and I'd rake them into piles and burn them in the far corner of the property. I sipped my coffee, bitter, no sugar, cooling faster than I would have liked. I held the cup with both hands, feeling the heat escape through the porcelain, and stared out at the yard, thinking of nothing in particular. The telephone rang. Abruptly, loudly, the sound broke the silence of the room. I didn't immediately realize where the sound was coming from. The phone was in my pants pocket, and I had to put my cup on the table to get it out. I looked at the screen, an unfamiliar number with a local Green Bay area code. I pressed the green button, put it to my ear. "Yes, Mr. Croft?" A man's voice, smooth, confident, with that professional politeness I immediately recognized as lawyerly. The kind of voice used by people who are paid to persuade other people. "My name is Philip Carruthers. I'm an attorney. I represent your son, Ken Croft." I didn't say anything back, just listened, waiting to see what he would say next. "Mr. Croft, I understand that today has been a very difficult day for you," Carruthers continued when my silence lengthened for a few seconds. "Sight or some, but I'd like to discuss with you the possibility of settling this matter without too much publicity. Perhaps we could meet somewhere quiet and talk about the situation. I'm sure we could find a solution that would suit all parties involved." "No," I said. "I beg your pardon." There was a note of surprise in his voice. "No, I don't want to meet with you. I don't want to settle. Your client has committed a crime, and he will be held accountable for it according to the law." Pause on the other end of the line. I heard Carruthers sigh, quietly, almost inaudible, but I caught the sound. Then he spoke again, his voice a little more insistent, a little more assertive. "Mr. Croft, I fully understand your feelings, and they are perfectly natural in this situation. But I'm asking you to think objectively. Ken is your son, your flesh and blood. This is a family matter, and perhaps it shouldn't come to litigation, with all the consequences that entails. We could discuss various options, restitution, public apology, whatever terms you deem fair and reasonable." "The terms that I consider fair already exist," I answered in a steady voice, trying not to raise my tone. "Ah, they are called the law. Your client broke that law, and now he must answer to the court. I have nothing more to say to you, Mr. Carruthers. Mr. Croft, please. I'm asking you to at least—" I pressed the red button, interrupting him half-heartedly. I put the phone on the arm of the chair next to the coffee cup and looked out the window again. The branches of the maple tree swayed behind the glass, the light wind stirring them, and the shadows of the leaves slid in uneven patches across the grass. The phone rang again less than a minute later. I looked at the screen, another number, also unfamiliar. I thought about not answering it, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed the button. "Yes? Barnaby?" A woman's voice, elderly, with the characteristic tear and tremor that people get when they're agitated or upset. I didn't recognize it at first, but after a moment I did. Violet, Ruth's distant relative, her mother's cousin or aunt. I couldn't remember exactly. We saw each other once every few years, usually at the funerals or memorials of mutual friends. "Violet," I said. "Barnaby, I've just heard the terrible news." Her voice shook harder, and the words came out fast, without pause, as if she was afraid I'd hang up if she stopped talking. My friend Lorna lives right next to the police station, and she saw Ken being led away in handcuffs with her own eyes. She called me right away and told me everything. Oh my God, Barnaby, what a nightmare. What a family tragedy. I just can't believe Ken would do something like that. He was always such a sweet boy. Remember how he— I pulled the phone away from my ear, looking at it. Violet's voice was still coming out of the speaker, muffled but intelligible, a steady stream of words that never seemed to end. She was talking about how shocked she was, how she hadn't expected it, how the whole family would be shocked. I put the phone back to my ear and waited for a pause as she drew in air. "Violet," I said calmly. "Yes, Barnaby, darling. I've got to go." "But I wanted to tell you that if you need support—" I pressed the red button, disconnecting the call halfway through. Put the phone back on the armrest with the screen down so I couldn't see it if it rang again. I picked up the cup of coffee. It was almost cold, barely warm. I finished it in one gulp, feeling the bitterness on my tongue. He put the empty cup on the coffee table next to the blueprints and leaned back in his chair, sat and stared out the window. The sun was slanting toward the west. The light was getting softer, more golden. The shadows lengthened, lay in dark stripes on the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a bird flew by. I couldn't make out what kind of bird it was. It disappeared too quickly behind the crowns of trees. I felt neither relief nor satisfaction. There was no triumph that justice had been done, that Ken and Dahlia had gotten what they deserved. There was no gloating, not even much bitterness. There was only an emptiness inside. Strange, almost palpable, but not unpleasant. It was as if something that had long occupied the space in his chest had finally gone, leaving behind an empty space. That space didn't press, didn't pull. It was just there, and it was normal. The week passed strangely, the days folding into one another, almost indistinguishable, but each one memorable in its own right. I got up early, like I'd been used to all my life, brewed coffee, sometimes worked on drawings for Walter, who called every other day with new questions about the project. Sometimes I just sat by the living room window and looked out into the yard, watching the wind ruffle the branches of the maple trees and the squirrels scurrying through the grass, hoarding something for the winter. The phone rang several times. Ken's lawyer, the same Carissers, tried to call twice, but I didn't answer. Just watched the phone screen blink to show an unfamiliar number and waited for the call to drop. Some distant relatives from Ruth's side showed up. 2 cousins, her sister's nephews, people I'd seen only 3 times in my life. People who suddenly decided they had a right to speak their minds about the family situation. Dahlia herself called once from jail. I heard an automated voice announce that the call was coming from the county correctional facility and immediately pressed the red button without listening. Detective Blaine was contacted twice. The first time was 2 days after my arrest, checking details, asking if anyone had bothered me, if there had been any threats. I said no, everything was calm. The second time she called on Friday, informing me about the preliminary hearing. Tuesday, 10 o'clock in the morning, county courthouse downtown. I have to show up if I want to attend. You don't have to come to the preliminary hearing, Mr. Croft, she said. But the prosecutor will be glad to have you there. It shows the court that you're serious. I'll be there, I replied. Tuesday came cold and clear. I woke up early, though I could have slept longer. The bus to the center ran every half hour and there was plenty of time. But sleep was gone as soon as I opened my eyes, and there was no point in lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the silence of the house. He got up, washed his face with cold water to wake up finally. He shaved, looking at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. A familiar old face with wrinkles around his eyes and mouth, with gray eyebrows that had become shaggy in recent years. Ruth had always said I should trim them, but I'd forgotten, and now there was no one to remind me. I put on the suit, the same dark gray one that had been hanging in my closet since Ruth's funeral, and which I hadn't worn much since. A white shirt, ironed a week ago when I thought I might go to church on Sunday but then changed my mind. The navy blue tie that Ken had given me for my birthday about 5 years ago. One of the few gifts he'd given me, not out of obligation, but because, as he'd said at the time, he'd seen it in a store and thought I'd like it. I rarely wore that tie, I kept it. Now I tied it in front of the mirror in the hallway, and my fingers remembered the movements, though it had been a long time since the last time. I looked at myself in the mirror. He looked decent for a man of 72. The suit fit a little looser than it had before. I'd lost 5 or 6 pounds since Ruth's death, and I'd never put it back on. But on the whole, I looked dignified, like a man who had come to court not to ask for mercy, but to demand justice. The bus arrived right on schedule. I sat at the window in the middle of the cabin, put my hands on my knees, and watched the familiar streets of Green Bay flicker by. The store where I bought groceries, the pharmacy where I got my blood pressure medication, the park where Ruth and I walked on Sundays while she could still walk, the library where Ken went every Saturday as a kid and brought home stacks of books about dinosaurs and space. It was all part of my life, part of the town I'd lived in for over 40 years. The courthouse was centrally located at the corner of Main Street and Jefferson Avenue, a massive brick structure from the turn of the last century, with columns at the entrance and wide steps of gray granite up and down, which people went up and down, lawyers with leather briefcases, witnesses with nervous faces, defendants accompanied by guards, judges in robes, prosecutors with files of documents. I got off the bus at a stop directly in front of the building and stood looking at it. Impressive, serious, the epitome of law and order. I'd walked past it many times over the years I'd lived in Green Bay, but I'd never gone inside. There was no reason to. Now there was a reason. I climbed the steps slowly, holding on to the granite railing, polished smooth by thousands of hands. My knees ached. Arthritis was worse in cold weather, and this morning was especially cold. But I managed it, reached the top step, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped inside. The hallway greeted me with high ceilings and the smell of old wood. The floor was marble, the walls dark wood paneled with portraits of past judges, serious men with mustaches and stern looks. People bustled in and out, talking in muffled voices, as if they were in a library or a church. The guard at the entrance, a young guy in uniform with a metal detector and a walkie-talkie on his belt, asked me to go through the frame. I emptied my pockets, put my keys, phone, and change in a plastic tray, and went through the metal detector. The frame didn't beep. The guard nodded, letting me pass through. Detective Blaine was waiting in the lobby, standing by a column and looking at something on her phone. When she saw me, she tucked the phone into her jacket pocket and walked over. "Shorty Jim. Mr. Croft, good morning," she said, and her voice sounded professional but not without warmth. "I'm glad you're here." "Good morning," I replied. "The hearing is in room 3 on the second floor." "Come on, I'll show you out. Everyone is already gathered there." We went up the wide staircase with wooden banisters, which were also polished to a shine by time and touch. The steps creaked beneath our feet. The old wood was showing its age, despite the imposing nature of the building. The corridor on the second floor was long and wide, and the doors to the courtrooms were closed, each with a number on it. Room number 3 was almost at the end of the corridor, on the right. Detective Blaine opened the door, held it open for me, and we stepped inside. The room wasn't as big as I'd expected. A row of 4 benches for the public, a table for the prosecution on the left, a table for the defense on the right, a dais where the judge sat, behind a tall wooden podium. Several people were already in the audience. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s, with her dark hair in a tight bun and a black pantsuit, sat at the prosecution table, reviewing documents, occasionally making notes in the margins with a pen. The defense attorney, Philip Carissers, whom I recognized from his voice on the phone, sat at the opposite table, also bent over papers. He looked up as I entered, and our gazes met for a second. He nodded at me, politely, neutrally, the way one nods at a stranger in an elevator. Ken and Dahlia sat next to Carissers at the defense table, both in orange prison robes that looked rough and tawdry against the austerity of the courtroom. Ken sat with his head down, hands on the table in front of him, fingers interlocked. His face was gaunt, his cheeks sunken, his stubble growing back unevenly, making him look older than he really was. Dahlia sat next to him, hair disheveled, no makeup, eyes red and puffy. She turned when I walked in, looked at me, and her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something or scream. But she remained silent, just staring, and there was so much in that look, pleading, hatred, despair, fear. I looked away. I sat down on the bench in the front row where Detective Blaine had gestured to me. She sat down next to me, placing the file folder on her lap. The prosecutor turned, looked at me and nodded politely, with a slight smile that signaled her appreciation for my presence. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the side door of the hall opened and the judge entered. Everyone stood up automatically as if on command. The judge, a man in his 60s with gray hair slicked back and a tired but stern face, walked to the dais, sat behind the podium, put on his thin-rimmed glasses, and looked over the documents in front of him. The secretary of the hall, a middle-aged woman in a gray suit, took a seat at a small table at the side. "Sit down, please," the judge said, and his voice was smooth, casual, without much emotion. He probably held hearings like this every day, and it was his regular job. Everyone sat down. The judge took off his glasses, wiped them with a handkerchief, put them back on, and looked at the defendants. "Case number 24789. The people of the state of Wisconsin versus Ken Edward Croft and Dahlia Rose Croft," he said clearly. "Defendants, please rise." Ken and Dahlia stood up. Carissers stood beside them. "Ken Edward Croft and Dahlia Rose Croft, You are charged with unlawful imprisonment under Section 946 of the Wisconsin Penal Code, grand larceny under Section 943, and fraud under Section 943.20. Do you understand the charges against you? Ken nodded, his voice low, barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Dahlia nodded too, but she said nothing, only pressed her hand to her throat, as if she couldn't make a sound. The judge shifted his gaze to the prosecutor. Is the prosecution ready to present a summary of the case? The prosecutor stood up, spread the papers in front of her. Yes, Your Honor. On November 23rd of this year, the defendants Ken Croft and Dahlia Croft arrived at the home of the victim, Barnaby Croft, on the pretext of visiting him. The following morning, Ken Croft locked his father in the bathroom, utilizing the deadbolt he had previously installed. The defendants then gained unauthorized access to the victim's bank account and transferred $170,000 from the account to an account belonging to Ken Croft. We have the victim's testimony, a recording of the emergency call made immediately during the commission of the crime, and evidence of the illegal withdrawals in the form of bank statements and transaction records. In addition, when the defendants were apprehended, $30,000 in cash was found in the trunk of their car, part of the amount stolen, which they had managed to cash out before the police arrived. The judge nodded, making notes on the paper in front of him. Did the defense wish to speak? Caruser stood up, adjusted his jacket, squared his shoulders. Yes, Your Honor. The defense does not dispute the facts as presented. My clients admit that the actions they committed were unlawful. However, we would like to draw the court's attention to the special circumstances of this case. We are talking about a family conflict which, unfortunately, has taken an extreme and unacceptable form. My clients have acted under the influence of dire financial circumstances and extreme desperation. Ken Croft is the victim's only son, and there are blood ties between them. We believe that reconciliation is still possible and that there are grounds for a less harsh approach to the case. He paused, turned, and looked at me. His eyes were gray, attentive, assessing, as if he were trying to see if I might flinch. Mr. Barnaby Croft is present in the courtroom today, he continued. The defense respectfully asked the court to consider the family ties between the victim and the accused, and the possibility of a full settlement without further prosecution. The judge looked at me over his glasses. Mr. Croft, do you wish to say anything to the court? I stood up, felt everyone turn toward me, the judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, Ken, Dahlia, Detective Blaine beside me. The clerk at her table looked up from her papers. The room grew quiet, that special kind of quiet where you can hear your breath. Yes, Your Honor, I said, and my voice sounded smoother than I'd expected. I have no desire to reconcile with the defendants. The crime was committed knowingly and with premeditation. I want the guilty to be punished according to the law. Carishers took a step forward as if he was about to add something. Mr. Croft, please reconsider. Ken is your son, your flesh and blood. Dahlia is the mother of your granddaughter Iris. Do you really want them to spend years in prison? Isn't there no way to forgive, to enter into their situation, to understand the desperation that drove them to this act? I looked at him, then shifted my gaze to Ken. My son sat with his head down, shoulders slumped, hands clenched into fists on the table. He didn't look at me, didn't look up, as if he was afraid to meet my gaze. No, I said clearly. There is no way. The judge tapped his gavel on the stand. Once, softly. Mr. Croft, thank you. You may be seated. I sat back down on the bench. Carishers stood for a few more seconds, then sank back into his chair, his face a look of restrained disappointment. The judge looked at the documents in front of him, turned a page, marked something with a pen. In view of the seriousness of the charges, the existence of direct and irrefutable evidence of guilt, and the absence of the victim's consent to reconciliation, I set bail at $100,000 for each of the defendants. The defendants shall remain in custody in the county jail until bail is set. The main hearing in the case is set for the 23rd day of December of this year, 10 o'clock in the morning, in the same room. He tapped the gavel again, louder this time. The hearing is over. Everyone stood up. The guards approached Ken and Dahlia, helped them up. Ken walked slowly, keeping his head down, as if the whole world had collapsed on his shoulders and pressed him to the ground. Dahlia turned around as they were leaving through the side door. looked at me, and there was something between a final plea and a deep, burning hatred in her eyes. Then the door closed behind them, and they were gone. The prosecutor gathered the papers into a folder, walked over to me, and held out her hand. "Mr. Croft, thank you for appearing today. Your presence was essential to the case. If we need additional testimony for the main hearing, we'll be sure to contact you in advance." I shook her hand, a firm, professional handshake. "Good. I'll be ready." Detective Blaine escorted me to the courthouse exit. We walked down the stairs to the lobby, past the security guard, out into the street. The sun was shining brightly despite the cold, and the air was fresh and clean. November was coming to an end. In a few days, December would begin. Winter would come with its snow and frost. "Can you manage, Mr. Croft?" Detective Blaine asked, stopping at the top of the stairs. "Do you need help with transportation?" "No, thank you," I replied. "I'll take the bus. There's a stop nearby." She nodded and extended her hand, and I shook it. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I will." She turned and walked back into the courthouse, and I walked down the steps and sat on the wooden bench at the entrance. Just sat and watched the people going up and down the steps, going in and out of the building. Lawyers with leather briefcases, hurrying to hearings, talking on their phones. Couples holding hands, apparently going to divorce proceedings or, on the contrary, to register their marriage. An old man with a cane, slowly climbing the steps with the help of a young woman, probably his daughter or granddaughter. A woman with a baby in her arms, standing at the entrance, talking on the phone, rocking the baby to stop it from crying. Life went on around me. People lived, solved their problems, went to court, got out of court, went about their business. I was one of them. Just another old man of 72 who had gotten into trouble but had dealt with it. The bank restored the money to my account after the investigation was completed. Detective Blaine said it was standard procedure for proven fraud involving third parties. $170,000 was back where it belonged, as if it had never been stolen. The house was still mine. No one could take it away or sell it without my consent. The car was returned 3 days after my arrest, clean and full of gas. Apparently, the police had filled it up before returning it. Life was back to normal, except that Ken and Dahlia were now in the county jail awaiting trial on December 23rd. The bail of $100,000 each was too high for them. They didn't have that kind of money, and there were no relatives willing to post it either. Detective Blaine had told me that yesterday on the phone when she called to see if I'd come to the hearing. I thought about the attic in my house. There were boxes of blueprints there, old designs I'd done early in my career, sketches of buildings, bridge calculations, structural diagrams. Some of these papers were about 40 years old, and I had long intended to sort them out, to throw away what I didn't need, to leave only what I wanted to keep for memory. But I kept putting it off. There were other things to do, more urgent, more important. Or maybe I just didn't have the energy to go up to the attic, to dig through the past, to remember when I was younger, when Ruth was alive, when Ken was a boy who got straight A's at school and dreamed of being an astronaut. Maybe now would be a good time to put the past in order, to put everything on the shelves, to keep only what's necessary. Throw out the unnecessary, make room. I stood up from the bench, shook the dust off my pants, which wasn't really there. I looked at the courthouse one last time, massive, serious, indifferent to the fates of the people who passed through its doors. Then I turned and walked toward the bus stop. My steps were slow but steady. My knees ached, but I ignored the pain. It was familiar, constant, part of life at 72. Ahead was the bus stop, then the bus home, then the house, then the attic with the boxes, then evening, dinner, a chair by the window, tea before bed. Life went on, and that was good.